Of course, because of the recruiting prowess, there's just droves of guys to talk about overall on the roster that performed in high school. But how does it shake out in regards to the way you see it playing out and the various skills of each guy, because they have to fit obviously into the offense and provide something different?
Yeah, I think looking at this wide receiver room, there's a lot of talent that returns. Obviously we just mentioned Pickens there, and he's the headliner. But you've got Kyrus Jackson, who I mentioned earlier, had 36 catches, tied with Pickens for the team lead, led the team in yards with 514 yards, had his big outings early in the season, and slowed down as Pickens came along. But still did have some impressive outings later on in the year. Caught a touchdown against Mississippi State in JT Daniels' first game as the starter. He's back, and he's more than likely going to play the slot position again. That's kind of where he found his role in this offense. Looking on the outside, you've got Jermaine Burton, who was a true freshman this past year, had a huge game in Daniels' debut against Mississippi State. He had 27 catches, 404 yards, 3 touchdowns on the year. Big things are expected of him. Looking beyond those guys, you've got Arian Smith, who had a touchdown late in the year against South Carolina, also had a big catch against Cincinnati. He's a guy that was banged up early on, came back from the injury. I think his first game that he actually played in was against Mississippi State. But the first time that he caught a ball was against South Carolina, and it was that touchdown pass. He's a speedster. Probably the fastest guy on this Georgia roster. It's either him or Keely Ringo, Georgia's star cornerback for this next year. So Georgia's got a burner in Arian Smith. Someone that could possibly play in the slot, but certainly can use that speed on the outside. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, he was another true freshman this past year. Did get injured against Florida, had a dislocation in his ankle and a fracture as well that caused him to miss the final 4 games of the year. Very gruesome injury, but it happened on what should have been a highlight for him. It was his first career touchdown reception, got across the goal line, got hit there, and suffered the injury. He's coming along. I don't think that he'll be ready to go for spring practice, but we talked to Kirby Smart yesterday, wide receivers coach Cortez Hankton as well, and they're really high on Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. Another guy who's coming off of an injury and didn't show up on the stat sheet for Georgia last year is Dominick Blaylock. But looking back 2 years ago, he was definitely a major factor. That was his freshman year. He suffered a torn ACL in the SEC championship game back in 2019 against LSU, and was coming along strongly in terms of rehab. And then in preseason camp, re-tore that ACL and missed the entire season. That's another guy that I would watch. It'll be interesting to see how he works in this Todd Monken offense, because he's played under James Coley. He hasn't played under Monken. But definitely someone that a veteran presence that Georgia can count on as a wide receiver.
Jackson Meeks and Adonai Mitchell would be 2 guys that came in the 21 class. I got to think that they're buried and they're going to be development guys for down the road, but it's got to be the first time in a long time. And not that either one of them won't turn into be an impact player of some sort, who knows, but the first time in forever that Georgia really didn't focus on the wide receiver position for a recruiting class and didn't bring in somebody or a group of players that were at the top of the board.
No, that's absolutely the case, because if you look back at that 2019 signing class, you had Pickens, you had Blaylock, and you also had Justin Robinson, who was a true freshman that year. Excuse me, the Micaiah Tongue was in that class. He ended up transferring out. Justin Robinson was in this next class, in the 2020 class, that also had featured Burton, Smith, and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. Those 4 guys in that class, plus the 3 that were in the 2019 class. Wide receiver has really been an emphasis for Georgia, and bettering that position with some young talent. You can see the development. Looking, back at that 2019 season, they really relied on an older guy like Lawrence Cager. They had Tyler Simmons in there as well. But if you look at the development of that position, it's a lot more dynamic. And look, add in the tight ends too. I mean, the way that Georgia has used their tight ends this past season under Monken, you've got Darnell Washington, John Fitzpatrick. Trey McKitty was there this past season. He is gone to the NFL, but the way that they've used their tight ends under Monken, it's a lot more dynamic, and I think that goes hand in hand with the play of the quarterback, the play of the wide receivers, and the overall play of the offense.